Good morning. Vijay Seshadri is right here with us at Sala Festival 2024. As you know, South Asian Literature and Art Festival 2024 is showcasing very prestigious and renowned authors, cinematographers, painters, and whatnot. And Vijay Seshadri, as most of you may already be knowing, is a Pulitzer Prize winning poet. He has come all the way from New York to celebrate and be a part of Sala 2024 at Stanford. So welcome to YoIndiaTV with me, Jasleen. It's a beautiful morning and people are so looking forward to hearing from you. Tell us, how's your feel so far?
I am really looking forward to these next 2 days. The program is wonderful. It's various. It's extraordinary. We have tremendous luminaries and all sorts of fascinating panels. And it's taking place on this beautiful Stanford campus in California sunshine. And so far, I've been having a wonderful time, and I know it's going to continue like this for the weekend. So.
Awesome. So I'll go back to 2014 when you received Pulitzer. 3 sections was a beautiful piece of work that you penned down. So tell us a little more about what it entails and how did you actually compile it together, all the different pieces of poetry to build the 3 sections.
Well, 3 sections is a book mostly about kind of the imagination in urban experience. But it also has a long piece of prose in it about some time I spent working as a biologist for the National Marine Fisheries Service here in America on the Bering Sea. And that's about 1/4 of the book. And it also has a very, very long poem called Personal Essay. And it came out in 2013 and it did well. And I was very, very grateful to have it acknowledged in the way that it was. And mostly I write an amalgam of long poems, short poems, and essays. And sometimes I put the essays in the book. Sometimes I, just publish the essays separately. And 3 sections was a book in which there was an amalgam of prose and poetry, which is not necessarily something I invented, of course. It goes back in American poetry to the writers like Robert Lowell and Elizabeth Bishop, who were very who had a real influence on me. And that's the nature of the book. And its character, I don't know. I guess you'd have to read it to decide for yourselves.
But what inspired you to think about human consciousness from birth to dementia?
I was kind of aware at a certain time. I think the large idea of the book was that there is a self-reflexive thing that we call consciousness. And that really all great art is fundamentally about consciousness. That's what I always tell my students, that it's an articulation of human consciousness. And I think I was just playing around with that idea through all of the poems I was writing, just the fact that we are aware that we are we. And that's such a mystery, the subjectivity of the mind, that we're conscious of ourselves as beings. And out of that, everything in the book springs. And of course, it's a very Indic theme. It's a very South Asian theme. If you think about the great traditions of Vedanta, Buddhism, for example, is very much about consciousness and being aware of yourself as conscious in some way, and stripping away the illusions of life.
Beautiful. So I would also like to ask you about The Long Meadow, which won James Lowland Prize of the Academy of American Poets.
Yeah, that was a book I wrote. It was published about 20 years ago, and its chief characteristic from a South Asian point of view is that it ends with a poem called The Long Meadow. And The Long Meadow is a poem that kind of is very much a New York poem, but it begins with a story from the Mahabharata, from the end of that great epic, and it retells that story in my own individuated fashion before making a turn and arriving in the contemporary world that I was living in then. The book is also characterized by a poem called The Disappearances, which appeared on the back page of the New Yorker right after 9/11, and was meant to sort of acknowledge and commemorate the tragedy of that day. And though that isn't really about 9/11, it's about a comparable event in American history, the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, which was, before 9/11, the largest tragedy that I had experienced in my life in America.
Yeah, so The Disappearances was pretty popular. So, like, what's your frame of mind when you pen down national issues like John F. Kennedy's assassination?
Well, I don't think I, as a writer, approach those things directly. What interests me about them is kind of the moral and spiritual atmosphere they create, and how the individual finds him, her, or themselves in history, and how the individual responds to history. I mean, I don't think any of the poems I write that I would consider political poems are also poems that are exhorting people to go out and act. You know, they're modes of contemplation and ways in which to understand the condition people find themselves in, so they can somehow modify their own inner lives, and in such a way as to be effective beings in the world. And that might involve political action, but you know, they're not political poems in the sense that they are meant to change directly anything, you know, except maybe changing consciousness.
Tell us a little more about the estuary and the choice of words. You know, when you write a poem, how would you think that this is the diction that I want to go with?
Yeah. Yeah, the estuary is a poem in which there's a lot of repetition. And the repetition is meant to lull people into a sort of hypnotic state. And then what the poem does is that it pulls the rug out from under the reader at a certain point and shifts the scale and the location of the poem radically. And for me, the choice of diction was sort of automatic, because when I wrote that poem, I'd been writing a long, long time, and I write like myself, and the choice of diction and the choice of the lexical choices, the word choices, and all of those things, they're just characteristic and second nature to me now. You know, they don't really, there wasn't anything specific I was doing in that poem to kind of make it different than other poems, except with the repetition, especially the repetition of the word salmon. Those of you who know the poem, or if you come across the poem someday and read it, you know, you will really be aware of how that word keeps coming back, yeah. You know.
Beautiful. So, you know, I would like to ask you about the non-fiction writing that you are teaching in one of the American universities. Why non-fiction? I mean, are you against fiction or something?
No. It's just an accident that I became a teacher of nonfiction. I had written essays, and I teach at Sarah Lawrence College, which is right outside New York City, and I started teaching there as a poet, but because I'd written essays and because they wanted to start a nonfiction writing program, they asked me to take over the program and start it. And so I wound up starting the program, and just started teaching nonfiction classes because of that, you know. And I'd always assumed that I was going to be a teacher of rhetoric and of poetry workshops, and I still teach rhetoric, but then I sort of, you know, wound up teaching nonfiction seminars, and it was congenial to me. I like teaching nonfiction writing. I don't have any prejudices against any other kind of writing at all, and I do when I teach my first year students and give them a general class in literature. I always teach lots of fiction, and I teach the occasional play, and then lots of nonfiction and poetry.
So, essays are pretty popular, particularly in US, and for those who are trying to get to college, they try to put in their best to write an essay that would impress, and it's kind of something that your career relies upon, rests upon, one of the key milestones in the life that take you to the next stepping stone of your life. So, any tips to all the students who want to write a beautiful essay to make it big in their career?
My first tip is, of course, a general one. Just read and read and read a lot of prose, and read really high quality prose, and imitate the people you really like, and also think about the essay as kind of a hybrid form. It involves communication. It's not something you're writing for its own sake, but writing in a kind of rhetorical relationship to readers in order to connect with them in basically a literary marketplace. I mean, the reason I started writing prose was because it was very, very hard to kind of survive and develop a career as a poet, because the publication of poetry is fairly difficult, but there's always a demand for good prose in the form of essays, in the form of reviews, in the form of editorials, in the form of journalism. I think journalism is a remarkably rich and complicated art form at its higher levels. And I felt that in order to survive as a poet, I had to develop other skills involving writing prose. And that's what led me to the essay. And then I got interested in the essay as its own form, as a compelling literary artifact in its own right, and one that had a sort of vitality to it. And I think it's been very, very helpful for me. I mean, I think as a poet, one has to think about one's survivability.
Awesome. So if you haven't read The Wild Kingdom, go ahead and do so. And we have Vijay Seshadri here, who is one of the graceful artists here at Sala Festival 2024. It was really beautiful talking to you today. Any final words to all the viewers of YoIndiaTV?
Read, and if you want to be a writer, you have to write. You can't just think about being a writer, you have to sit down and write. So read and write. Thank you.
Thank you so much.